You're listening to ABA On Call, hosted by myself, Rick Kubina, and Doug Kostewicz. This is your front row seat to the future of behavior analysis. Join us for fresh ideas, practical strategies, and bold conversations designed to inspire action. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another riveting episode of ABA On Call. Doug, today we have a fabulous interview. Two people I adore. And I'm not just talking about you.
I know. We don't interview me anymore.
No. We are joined today by Jen Wertalik, who is a professor at Georgia Southern University, and Pam Wolfe, who is retired of Penn State University, who I will disclose has been my dear colleague for many, many years. And they have written a book, and the book is on sexuality education. And this is the first time we've ever talked about anything like this on the podcast, which, thinking back about it, I don't know how it took us so long to bring this topic forward because it's so important.
Yes.
Let's start off by just asking both of you a question. This book is coming out very soon. And why do you all feel that sexuality education is so important for students with disabilities?
Well, I guess I'll start us off. There is just a long checkered history with sex ed in general. And then when you add the layer of disability, people get really uncomfortable. But there are just so many statistics and indicators that it's necessary. There's just a huge increase, prevalence of abuse for individuals with disabilities, probably 4 to 8 times higher than the general population for that. A statistic I just looked at a while back said 80% of women, 30% of men had been sexually abused with disability, those with disabilities. So it's alarming. So we wanted to look at it in terms of the abuse, unwanted pregnancies, avoidance of STDs. But we also wanted to look at it in terms of what people don't always think of as sexuality, sex ed. We wanted to look at it in terms of relationships, in terms of friendships, in terms of a quality of life that everybody's afforded. So we were going far more than the physiology. It's a topic that makes people very uncomfortable. I was just at a social outing and someone said, what do you do? And what's your book about? And I told them the title and the whole room went quiet. Nothing more. Nobody knew what to say. But those of us on the front line who have been working with individuals with disabilities know this is so very, very needed.
And I'd add to that, being able to provide this type of education to students with a range of disabilities allows us to empower them, allows us to teach them the ability to make their own decisions, to have meaningful relationships if they want to have them, to be able to pursue things if they choose to do so. Another big part too is being able to understand your body and your identity. That becomes big with needing this type of instruction for the populations in which we were talking about and looking at too. Another issue that comes up and related to kind of a separate end of abuse is also the high rates of inappropriate or courting or dating behaviors that are prevalent within this population. And it puts these individuals at risk for stalking behaviors, being possibly looked at as conducting kind of felonies and things like that. So the rates of those are pretty high as well for individuals with intellectual disabilities, developmental disabilities too.
And you can imagine, I taught in some of the curriculum that I looked at, asking for a date and understanding dating and what's the difference between stalking and being a really ardent admirer and sticking with it and getting a yes from someone on a date. And those are decisions that we make more easily, perhaps, I hope, but not all individuals with disabilities can make those fine distinctions. And as you know, social skills are hard. That's one of the hardest things to teach and the hardest thing to understand for individuals. They say Most people with disabilities lose their job because of social skills, that they're bugging people at the water cooler. They're taking all the coffee, all of these nuances. So social skills are huge.
So, one follow up for this, because I know we have some other questions, and I'm very interested in hearing those. I don't want to tread on that yet. So, the book is it, because there's various, it's teaching others how to interact with individuals with disabilities on this topic. It's teaching the individual how to interact on this topic. This sounds very, are you attacking this from all angles? The caregiver, the peers, the individual, and the difficulties surrounding that.
Yeah, we really tried to gear it toward teachers, but the teacher um, mantle is caregivers,
Right.
are individuals with disabilities themselves. So it's not one specific audience. But we really wanted to hone in on the fact that it's more than just physiology, that we need to empower individuals with disabilities to control their lives. And we wanted empiricism in it because sometimes empiricism and the way we teach it is very rote. Um, you may have had sex ed, and is often somebody at the front lecturing you about something. And we know it, many individuals with disabilities can understand that. It's just not going to be any use for them. But we wanted to look at empirical ways to teach that we knew about good instruction and apply it to sex ed. So it's a broad audience with an empirical base and is looking at sex ed as comprehensive.
I'm curious, when you were talking earlier about flirting, I think about that as certainly a social skill, and norms are always switching. There was a time where, well, I mean, if you think back, I mean, I'm of the age now where when you've been through several generations, you can think about how, something that was common turns out made people pretty uncomfortable, and that has shifted in society. So how did you all determine, what would be uh, some timeless content? Like, yes, understanding things of the physical nature are always going to be there, but then on the social side, and even too with the abuse side, like how did you determine where you would take that content from and what you include?
I would say a big part of our book deals with looking at existing kind of resources out there. CECUS is a big one. They're national standards and they have guidelines out there about what's appropriate topics that should be taught across the lifespan, how you could break it down, and start teaching content at a younger age and then building that across time. And they have a lot of areas in there. They put out the guidelines, but they reassess and kind of put them out. I'm not quite sure how many years apart, but they have a lot of information. And I would say, Pam, I don't know if you disagree with me, but that's kind of where we based off of a lot of the content areas that should be covered are these existing resources between CECUS and then FOSS is another one who puts out kind of information to help educators um, look at what topics are prevalent. And it's a very vast range of topics, going from human development all the way to looking at things in society, looking at internet technology, things that are just more prevalent as, many of us didn't experience the vastness of social media, but looking at sexual education within social media and all of those considerations. So that kind of drove a big part of the content that we're targeting in the book or recommending to target.
Yeah, and we really wanted to look at decision making, helping somebody. What is the consequence if you did this? What is the consequence if you did this? It depends on your student and whether they can take the perspective of somebody else. Sometimes that's very, very difficult for individuals with autism, let's say. But trying to go through what would happen if I kept calling them. Well, they may say no. They may call the police. So you have to think of the consequences of your action.
Mm. In terms of the content, this is a technical question. when do you start? Is there a time that's too early or a time that's too late?
The recommendations are to start early, and they start providing guidance at for kindergarten, even with some preschool kind of things, with just knowing where the family is, knowing where the friend is, being able to make basic choices about things I like and I don't like, even at the basic level of toys and activities that we want to play with. And their recommendations, and we're agreeing with these recommendations, is that we should start that young and start targeting things that are important as we develop into our sexual beings, as we mature across time. Like, they recommend a very early start to a lot of these things, with like just some basic kind of skills and being able to say no and start teaching those skills really early. Even if it's just related to kind of everyday activities, think about a preschool everyday kind of activity. Like, I don't want to play with this, but I want to play with that. In building those self advocacy skills at a really young age.
And knowing it's your body and you have a right to say no, and this is where I can touch and where I can't touch. That starts real early. And I know people get really kind of freaked out, if we say technical term, thinking about sex ed at a young age, but it happens all the time. You are educating your kids, if you have children, or your students all the time, the messages that you send. So it's everywhere, it's around you. I mean, take an opportunity to do it. It doesn't mean we're advocating that an individual who's 5 be learning something that's above their ability level. It's just that you take opportunities to say, this is my body, this is who can touch it, this is what if I'm not comfortable. I want Susie as my friend. How do I make her as my friend? Can I show her kindness? That type of things.
Well, I think that brings us to the end of the first part. So we're going to get the first secret word, and that is lotion. So the second question, we're kind of going right on the edge of it. What are some of the challenges you've encountered when helping teachers and parents approach this topic? I know you said that there's some uncomfortable nature about just the topic and talking about it. What are the challenges you've experienced having them approach this topic?
And Pam, I can start with that one. One of the big things that comes to mind right away is just the lack of sometimes acknowledging that there's even a need for it. Approaching teachers, stakeholders, the larger kind of communities in which we're kind of governed with our public education sectors and those kind of things, is sometimes there's just a not a vast knowledge that this is something even this population needs. And another kind of part of that, which I think kind of ties with it, is that oftentimes individuals with disabilities and neurodiverse individuals are not seen as sexual beings. They're seen as kind of perpetually as children. And therefore, then people are treating them that way. So even if we're 16 and we are starting to we're either starting puberty or have already kind of been through it, we're still seeing them as children. And a lot of people will still say, my child's 15, but cognitively they're 5. So this is kind of way beyond anything we ever need to talk about. They're not there yet. And the challenge to kind of educate people too and kind of work alongside them that, our bodies are developing, at the rate in which everybody's kind of go through. And, there's a range in which it ages in which we go through puberty. And it varies from person to person, but your child could be going through puberty at this point, and things are weird, and puberty is hard for everybody. And, kind of that has been a big challenge kind of early on. I've found in my career is the view that maybe we're not going to be sexual beings, and we're just not viewing people in that kind of capacity.
Yeah, that is a really big problem. Thinking that the cognitive developmental level is the one that's guiding you when the body's going on its own. It's not waiting on any timeline. And sometimes we set down rules that's all exclusionary. Don't do this, don't do that, don't do this. It's all a no. And our IEPs are full of, will decrease, get rid of this, will, stamp that out. And sexuality and relationships don't work that way. I had a student when I was teaching who had severe disabilities and a girl in the class who had a really big crush on him. He was clueless to this. He would reach out and try to touch his hand and smile at him. It's going to happen whether you want it to or not. She was finding a way to communicate with him. We hadn't taught him any clues about how to read that, but it's happening. It's happening. So it has to be taught. People are sexual beings. That's not to say everybody is interested in sex. I had one person that I interviewed, self-advocate, who said, I don't want to have sex. Everybody tells me if I meet the right guy, it's going to happen. It's going to be fine. She said, I just don't like it. I don't like the sensory feel of it. I don't like the noise. And that was an eye opener to me. Because when I say everybody's a sexual being, that also includes I'm asexual as well. So you have to look at all of the range there. So I certainly learned things along the way that I hadn't even really thought of. So yeah, there are lots of barriers. Parents are scared. We think if they give the okay, it's a whole pass for something. Teachers are worried about legal issues and how to teach it. And quite honestly, there are some people who should not teach it. If you are reticent to even say words that are related to sex ed, you're not cut out for this. If you're going to go giggle in a corner or you're going to use euphemisms for something, it's not going to work. So yeah, you have to acknowledge that. You have to have people who can handle the content and feel good and open about it, but also are given the resources to do it. Schools are notoriously poor at that. And I know I was shocked, and I think you were too, Jen, that even when we were talking general ed, sex ed is not widely always available in all of the states. I think there are 36 or 37 that mandate abstinence only, give nothing else. So 14 are and 36 are for abstinence and contraceptives, but they aren't for relationships or any of the other things that go along with it. It's that no, no, no. So yeah, teachers aren't given the resources. Sometimes the curriculums don't match their students. If you have someone who has more severe disabilities, you're not going to be able to get up there and lecture. This is the penis. This is what a vagina is. This is how that happened. It just doesn't work. It's meaningless. So you also have to learn how to adapt. And that gives a lot of fear to teachers as well.
Yeah. I think we're living through a time where it seems education in general it just receives more and more negative attention. I was listening to a parent on some news story, and she made the claim that she didn't want teachers to teach anything, but how do you teach kids to read and do math? Like literally anything else. And this was a teacher that didn't like DEI. This was a teacher that didn't want to hear anything remotely controversial. So talking about sexuality, certainly, I'm sure would really fit into that. This parent would object to it, but yet the way you framed it, just thinking about sexuality, and I think a lot of people are probably guilty of this. When you hear that term, you just think the physical aspect to it. But who wouldn't want to start off very early just with relationships? Like I have a granddaughter now who is going to be going to school in about another year, and she needs to understand what friends are. She needs to understand these things about relationships. And I don't know what parent would object to that. I don't know that I actually have a question here. I think that just what you've been saying is resonating with me. And really, I'm inspired by the work that you all are doing and the fact that you spent all this time. You're bringing this together, you're putting in a book, and you're going to be sharing it with people because it's such a needed topic.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that endorsement. That was beautifully stated, Rick.
And I'm going to, we do talk about behavior analysis, and obviously that's sort of the framework that we're all dealing with here. And I hear, even though the topic is challenging, I'm sure the way you've proposed this could be very frustrating to some people, because this is no different than, hey, we're going to teach reading a certain way. And that usually is more explicit instruction. We the data support that versus some other ways that are out there. So I'm sure that not only is the topic a challenge, but letting teachers know, hey, we're going to take this very specifically. We're going to identify behaviors, or that can be difficult just as well as the topic itself. Correct or incorrect?
Oh, yes. Very, very, very much correct. And teachers are afraid and uncomfortable with this. And sometimes there's not room in a curriculum. Sometimes it's very good to add this to health standards so that it can be eased in and part of the curriculum formally. A great idea is to put it in IEPs or plans formally. That's not to say it's easy, but it's takes somebody who's advocating. And honestly, the teachers that I've spoken with see these behaviors. It's not as if it's something abstract. It's, oh my gosh, he was masturbating when we were on a community-based outing. I'm faced with this right now, so I don't get to be esoteric about it. I have to figure out a way to teach this and then teach it now.
Yeah, and I also think behaviorally, they're looking for these behaviors. They're functioning for something. If you continue to promote don't, that behavior is still going to seek
Right.
out different ways to interact with that reinforcement. You have to teach the alternative way. So it's very frustrating to hear these don'ts and don'ts and don'ts and as goals. Well, that doesn't mean the do. How the appropriate alternative, something else to allow that behavior to interact with those contingencies is imperative for the development of the individual. And now you're framing it in this way. So,
And that's
yeah,
and
go ahead.
and that's something that we've kind of highlighted in the book as well, is if we are looking at some of the challenging or, behaviors that might be appropriate just happening in their own contextual kind of environments, highlighting the importance of finding out also some teaching strategies along with some ways in which we can decrease and replace and work with replacement behaviors. And really, I think throughout the book, that's something we've highlighted and provided examples with for people, is to not just kind of put a Band-Aid on the kind of
Right.
behavior. And I think that it really ties into too, unfortunately, a lot of times when this issue starts to come up and people realize the need for this type of instruction is because a behavior is happening. Like Pam said, masturbating out in public, touching other people's um, breast or butt in the middle of class. And when those things happen, it's like, oh, we need to do something. But we're advocating that we should be starting ahead of time
Right.
and working on all these different skills to build so that we aren't just kind of in, being so reactive about it and
Right.
highlighting those other pieces that Doug that you mentioned.
Mhm.
Proactive versus reactive, right?
Mhm. Absolutely.
Well, those are the challenges. And that brings us to our second secret word, and that is dinosaur. So this third part is been kind of there. I mean, this is often seen as a taboo subject, as we mentioned. Have you faced pushback, different than challenges to try to get, have you faced pushback? How would you then, in turn, and how have you navigated those to find that positive result for the child, perhaps implementing? So, what that pushback is and how to kind of navigate around it.
I think one of the first things is to have parents understand that their child is growing up as a sexual being. That's a first one. Um, Secondly, I've often used data. There's data that shows this behavior is happening this amount. We have to do something to replace that behavior. Also, sharing with families statistics and other things nationally. I hate to only lead with the abuse because then people see the perpetual child and the need to protect. But that is an alarming one for parents to realize that gosh, that abuse goes on so frequently. But also, gosh, don't you want your child to be a happy individual and part of society, and trying to approach it in that way? That this is something that will get your child more included in an environment. They will be excluded if they're doing some of these behaviors in a classroom. So, looking at what's happening, also what's going to need to be done in the future. So we try to look ahead so that we're building on the skills that we need there.
I think something else I've worked to do is to take time and space to acknowledge that it is an uncomfortable topic to talk about. And if they're just, feeling any kind of discomfort, they have these kind of feelings that it's okay. And kind of acknowledge that instead of kind of coming in with, well, I don't really care about your feelings. We have to do this for your child or for your students. Is to really give it some time to, it is hard. It is a hard topic to talk about. And, a lot of, in day-to-day interactions, like we said previously, a lot of people don't say sex, don't talk about sex. They don't say the words at all on an everyday basis. So I think it's important to acknowledge that it's awkward. And it is going to be a little bit of a challenge as well. And another kind of strategy, I think, Pam, we've kind of gone through it too, is to try to also, if you are in the position to either provide the instruction or you're a parent, is to also kind of look a little bit at your own beliefs and kind of take a minute to think about, are you holding these beliefs as well as a teacher that, you know, they're not going to ever be in a relationship. They're, the odds of them having sexual intercourse with somebody are very low. And being able to kind of like almost check yourself and, think about those things like, oh, I am having these feelings. I need to kind of work around that too. So I'm able to best support my, my student or my child. I was at a conference about maybe a little over a year ago. I'm talking about this topic and I had a range of people in the audience. And what struck me was, and there was a parent that came up to me after and she's like, this is the most uncomfortable thing for me. Um, and I don't know how to do it. I don't know kind of which way to go, but I am very now aware that I do need to learn to be more comfortable with this to best support my son. Because he was in a situation where the schools were not providing any type of education for him. And she was like, I need to be comfortable because it's very evident that I'm going to be the one having to teach him and to work on these skills and to learn to do this. So she kind of spoke to me a little bit more in length about kind of her process and her journey of realizing she needs to kind of get past the awkwardness. And I just thought it was a really heartwarming story because unfortunately, the situation where that education wasn't provided, but she was really moving kind of forward like, well, I'm going to do it then. If nobody else is going to do it, I'm going to keep my son safe. I'm going to give him all the opportunities in the world if he wants them, so he can have those choices.
Yeah. I was talking to a woman as well whose son was accessing online pornography. And she actually said, I want to teach him the right way to do this and the safe way to do this so he's not getting himself in trouble legally, that he knows the risks, he knows where to do this, that we're not going to do it in the middle of a classroom. And she was okay with her son accessing pornography. And then you have someone else who would say, oh my gosh, no, that is just absolutely the wrong thing to do. You have to check your attitudes, first of all. And then you have to figure out, does the individual with disabilities, would they have access to that without a disability? And then, okay, if so, and that's what they want to do, how do I teach it safely? How do I teach it so there's not stigma attached? And when and where to do something. When and where is a big one, because those are, again, the nuances of knowing and decision making. Yeah. I think,
I'm sorry.
go ahead.
To tie quick to what you're saying too, I know a big issue too that's kind of come up that we need to consider and try to do some more work in is, just accepting also cultural differences amongst families that we're working with. And I think, Pam, that's when you said, like, would we be thinking this way for, a neurotypical child versus the, our neurodiverse individual we're working with. And that's another piece too to kind of have to work around and talk to families about. And being able to find some, I think so, especially with families and teachers, that trust issue is a big thing. And developing a relationship with us so that we are able to kind of meet them where they're at and then kind of grow forward together without kind of coming in just so strong without those considerations. I think are really important to consider that too.
And I think you have to acknowledge that if the family says no to sex ed, it is no to sex ed. It is not something that you continue covertly to teach. You only do something when you've checked out your local standards and your school board and your administrator, because you need support for doing that. I urge teachers not to go rogue on this. Well, I know it's the right thing to do. You have to work within what the family wants. To not do so is indeed folly.
As Doug mentioned, we do have many behavior analysts. Our audience expands to, we have teachers, we have speech and language pathologists, we have counselors. And I like to think of our audience as people that are helping other people. So this is a really good topic to dive into. And based on what you just said, Pam, you said two things that I'm going to blend together. Number one, you're talking about being an advocate in dealing with a particular issue. So what happens in cases when, let's say we have an audience member that has a child who's doing something that requires attention? They will come up with a plan. Parent doesn't want that plan being implemented. Like, how do people navigate these situations where clearly there's an issue going on, but for whatever reason, parent doesn't isn't on board? How would you recommend that people would handle those situations?
Jen, do you want to take that? Or
It doesn't matter.
I think that you cannot impose your values on someone else. I think I take it from more of a behavioral issue rather than a sexuality per se. So I say this behavior is occurring. What alternative can we give? We're strong ABA advocates. We're singing to your choir as well. And I believe that good instruction follows to sexuality as well. So I would frame it in a behavior um, framework that I needed to look at to increase or decrease, and look at FBA and say, we need a replacement for it, not just to take it away. But you do have to work with the family. If the family votes no on it, they won't sign the IEP, and they have the right to do that. Frustrating sometimes.
I was just going to say that it kind of falls. I've encountered the same thing with service delivery, working with ABA clinics and treatment plans. A parent has to sign off on those for us to be able to deliver services. And sometimes you do have to have some conversations and and I think that goes back to here are some of our goals, here are some of your goals. How can we blend those together? Especially if there isn't an inherent issue in terms of a problem behavior at that moment or a challenging behavior happening, and being able to kind of have those conversations, I think, are really important, to try to maybe explain a little bit more of why we're looking to target these things, because it might not be, as a parent to somebody who hasn't had more experience working with these different kinds of behaviors or seeing the negative effects when we don't provide this type of information.
Yeah, I often go to the future. Okay, what's going to happen then when they're ready for the group home and aren't able to get into a group home because they show this behavior. Okay, so we're looking ahead and thinking, okay, this will exclude my student. This will exclude my student from going out in the community because he's grabbing women's breasts. So you try to put it in a context of this is a consequence if we don't teach that. And I generally had good success with that, but I've also had parents who said no, and that's been very tough to swallow. But you have to respect it.
All right. So I think I know the answer to this, but I'm going to throw it out there. We've been talking about this from the parent perspective. What if the parent wants this? What if the teacher wants this, but the child doesn't?
Woo!
Or the child wants it and is able to ask for it, but it's misaligned with what other people want for that child. That's we've been coming at it from, this is someone making decisions for the child. The child can't make the decisions. What if they're at a level, they're still having some type of disability that's interfering with some things, but they're able to know, I want to do this, and the parent won't let them. How do you navigate those waters?
I think those are challenging ones, too. And thank you for bringing this up, Doug, because I know Pam and I had talked about this previously, and kind of thought about, and we advocate to bring in the individual as often and as readily into this decision-making process. And the the information that's being out there is many individuals want this type of education. They're saying they want it, they need it. They've either struggled and don't want to struggle anymore, and bringing them in. And I think ultimately the way I view too is a lot of this is they are our clients. If we're working with these students, they're the individuals that we are focused on, and we should be doing our best to incorporate what they want into everything in which we do. And having them, if they're able to consent or assent to what we're doing, is just so imperative. Um, but it is a really big challenge for somebody who's saying, like, I want to have a girlfriend. I need to learn how to do this. And there's a parent that's saying, no, no, you're not ready yet. We'll talk about this later. You don't need that kind of skill. So, Pam, do you have a little bit more to add?
No, I think you've got it right. I was at a doing a workshop, and some individuals with disabilities were in the audience, and one guy stood up after this and said, "Why has no one told me about this?" He felt totally
Yeah.
excluded, that he'd been protected from this all of the time. We try to include individuals with disabilities to the greatest extent possible in their own lives. And as I mentioned, the woman who was asexual, she just simply wasn't interested. People were trying to push that on her. So yeah, you have to listen to the individual, and depends on their age as well, on who's taking ownership of that education. Yeah.
I think just more resources to the more things we could put out there and the more opportunities we can have to educate everybody that's involved, especially Doug, when you bring up the parent aspect, the more that we can work with parents alongside them and kind of explain these things and show them different ways in which we can tackle these topics, as well as just the broad spectrum of what sexuality education really does entail when we're doing a comprehensive approach. Sometimes when we start there, I've had some success with starting with, okay, I'll agree to these. And then as we start to kind of build and show progress on things, I've had some parents that are a little bit more open to, okay, I know now he wants to maybe try to have a cell phone and text some girls in his class. I think I'm ready. Like, kind of that approach has been successful too.
Good. Very good.
Yeah. We're towards the end of our interview, but I got to get this question out there very quickly. Have either of you two seen Love on the Spectrum? And if you have, this show are these shows more exploitive or are they more advocacy based?
Wow, I love that series. I have to say, I think it is exploitive. I really don't always agree with how they teach the strategies. That's one of my big pet peeves. But I'd like to believe the individuals with autism consented. I'd like to believe that, and that would depend a lot. And I know individuals with autism that I've worked with really want answers, and they may see this as the way to get answers. One guy said, "Please write me a list of how to get a date." Just wanted an answer, and it's not like that. So they may want that information. I hope they have consented. But in beers, in my eyes, I get a little queasy occasionally.
And I've only seen some episodes of it, but I feel like I'm always one that, like, I can kind of see maybe there's some not so great aspects, but then there's some other good aspects too. But I've also had the opportunity to see a couple of the individuals that were in the show speak at conferences, which was eye opening to hear kind of more in person versus what's on TV, and hear them kind of talk and advocate for these things as well. So that's a really nice kind of thing to see. And again, I hope they're all consenting to this and kind of all of those things. But I think a lot more people I've heard more recently are just watch the show and they have like, wow, like I really didn't see how relationships were possible, or that like relationships can look different from person to person and couple to couple, and that there are just so many different ways people can be in want relationships, and they could say, I want to do this, but I don't want to do this. And maybe we're in there for the companionship. So I know it's opened a lot of people's eyes to the idea that this should be normal. It should be normal that all individuals have these opportunities and can make these choices. So I always go back and forth there because I don't want to ever think that anything's bad inherently, but I think there's been some good that's come of it, especially when I've heard some families who didn't quite see how their child could be in a relationship or things like that, and it's helped them. So
It certainly gets the topic out there.
Mhm.
That I can say is a positive of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Doug, you on that comment have brought us to our first secret word, which is fourth. Let me, on behalf of Doug and our audience, let me thank you both for taking time to speak with us about this important topic. I will say that your book, this podcast is going to come out in August, and your book will be out in September. So we will put a link to the show notes where people can find at least the flyer of your book. And if that's something that people are interested in, then that's something that they can pick up later. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for listening.
thank you so much. And also a little shout out to our other co-author, Cheryl Lustern, who couldn't be here today as well. But she's done a lot of work with us too. So I just wanted to mention her name. But thank you, Doug and Rick, for this opportunity and all you've done for us with making this possible.
Very appreciated. Thanks, guys.
That wraps up our episode, and we look forward to talking to you all again on the next ABA On Call. Thank you for being part of ABA On Call. Want to grab your CEU? Just click the link in the instructions, complete the quiz, enter the secret words, and pay the fee to download your certificate. You've done the work, claim the credit. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you in the next episode.